Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my March wrap up. So the month of March was a long one actually, and a lot happened. I did participate in the rereadathon. As well as that, I went to 2 gigs in the month of March, and I also was sick for about a week. So a lot has happened. I'm kind of regretting not doing a mid-month wrap up because some of these books I read with sick brain and now I don't remember a whole lot about them. So we're gonna see how this wrap up goes. I have 7 books to share with you today that I finished and 1 that I did unfortunately DNF. As usual, we will be going through these books in the order that I read them, but first up we will be starting with the stats. So in the month of March I read a total of 3,314 pages, which is an average of 106 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 1 3-star read, 3 4-star reads and 3 5-star reads. For our demographics, I read 2 children's books, 2 young adult books and 3 adult books, and for the formats we had 6 audiobooks and 1 physical book. For the genres, I read 4 fantasies, 1 mystery thriller, 1 classic and 1 contemporary. And the places that I sourced these books from, 6 were from my existing own TBR pre-2019 and 1 was a book that I have hauled in 2019. So getting straight into the wrap up, the first and the 4th books that I read this month were from the same series, so I'll talk about them together, and they were Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban and Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. I gave both of these books 5 stars, and before you skip ahead and think nothing's new here, this is just another booktuber, giving Harry Potter 5 stars, this was revolutionary to me. I read the first 2 books in January and I gave Philosopher's Stone 3 stars and Chamber of Secrets 4 stars, and I thought that everybody who enjoyed Harry Potter and rated it 5 stars was full on riding the nostalgia train. However, what I discovered when I was reading these 2 books is that Harry Potter gets really fucking good. Now, I have read these before, but only once when I was a child, and this is my first time rereading them as an adult. So I'm familiar with the story, I like the story, I have a special place for it in my heart, but I didn't expect the books to be actually all that good when I was 25. The Prisoner of Azkaban was a real turning point in the series. It is where the books start to get a lot darker, and they are also a lot better written. The first 2 books in the series are written more like children's books, but these 2 books, started off with The Prisoner of Azkaban, are written in a more transferable style. I always thought that Harry Potter was sold in the adult section of Waterstones as well as the children's section, because everybody who's kind of my age wants a collection of Harry Potter books because it's so nostalgic to us and it's such a big part of our lives, and it was a huge phenomenon when we were growing up. However, what I discovered reading these 2 books is that actually the reason why there are Harry Potter books in the adult section is because this is such a transferable writing style, and there is so much value to be taken from these books at any age in your life that it would be perfectly acceptable for an adult to read this for the first time and enjoy it. Obviously there is not going to be anything too dark or gory in these, but there is definitely a level of darkness and complexity that I did not expect. An example of this is that in the Goblet of Fire there is a scene where a guy who is a famous Quidditch player is tried for assisting the Death Eaters back in the day when Voldemort was in power, and essentially he is never really put to trial. People just deem him innocent because he is a sports player. Now, this is a very small section of the book and not wholly relative to a lot that goes on, but things like that do happen today, and it's things like that that children won't pick up on. In modern day society, sports players get away with a lot more and celebrities get away with a lot more than the average person because of their status, and that is definitely something that I would never have picked up on as a kid that I noticed now. Another reason that these 2 books are so much better than those that go before them is that the Goblet of Fire especially shows a bigger plot structure, I want to say, throughout the book. In the first 2 books you're kind of just meandering around in Hogwarts and then everything happens at the end of the book. All throughout the beginning, like, an odd thing may happen but nobody really cares about it until the shit goes down at the end. But in this, the plot was carried throughout enough to keep me interested, because I noticed when I was reading the first 2 that while I was content just hanging out in Hogwarts, I was kind of like, okay, but when is the plot actually going to kick in, because a lot needs to happen and there's only 50 pages left. So long story short, I thoroughly enjoyed these and I was shocked. I was shocked by how much I like these, and I probably rated the first 2 books up, just a tiny bit for nostalgia, but trust me when I say that I'm giving these 5 stars not because I'm nostalgic for them, but because they're actually really good and I'm really surprised that I enjoyed them this much. Then I read Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyon. This was my Bookopoly book for the challenge to read a book set in a culturally diverse world, and this follows a young girl called Leigh who is dragged from her home and taken to be the consort for the king, who is actually a demon. In this world you have different castes of people. I think the moon caste is the demon caste and they're the highest ranked in society, and the paper caste are full humans and they are on the lowest rung of society. Leigh is a paper girl and she has come to the attention of the king because she has bright gold eyes. So this guy takes her to be one of the king's paper girls, which is essentially a selection of consorts that he sleeps with for a year and then he gets new ones essentially. Definitely trigger warnings for sexual assault in this. There were some bits that were rough to read, and for a young adult book it did go a little deeper and was a little more uncomfortable to read than I expected it to be. I expected it to be very glossed over, but there is quite a bit of detail and enough for you to insinuate what is definitely going on. So there were parts that were very difficult for me to read. Now I gave this book 4 stars and I really enjoyed the setting of this. You guys know I love East Asian fantasy for the setting and the atmosphere, and I thought that the world building in this was very good. I enjoyed the imagery of the cast that is in between Moon and Paper. I think they're the Steel cast. They're half demon, so they have animalistic features but are mainly human, and I really enjoyed the portrayal of them and the imagery that I was getting in my mind as I was reading about those. The chemistry between the 2 people involved in the female-female romance in this book was electric and I loved that. Now there are a couple of things that I did dislike about this book or just didn't love as much, which is why I marked it down, and one is Leigh's gold eyes. Throughout this book I was kind of wondering why she had gold eyes. I thought that it might have something to do with the plot, might be a reveal, she might have a reason for looking this way, but it seemed that it was just used as a way to get the king to notice her, so it was more believable that she was dragged in to be a paper girl, which was kind of disappointing. It does follow kind of a predictable plot structure. I mean, that's okay, it's the kind of plot structure that I like. It's like a rebellion kind of plot structure, but the ending, there's something that's alluded to throughout this, and it is that the people who are born, I think it's just paper cast people, have a pendant with a word inside that will unlock on their 18th birthday, and the word inside will kind of define them and is a prophecy of what will happen in their life. And I felt like that was really underwhelming, but the significance of this pendant and the word inside it was so hyped up that I felt like no matter what the word would be, I would have been disappointed by it just because of how much weight was put on this one item. However, I am definitely excited to get to the second book in this series when it is released later in the year, because I did thoroughly enjoy this. It just wasn't the most unique and original young adult story that I've read. I then read Bonfire by Kristen Ritter, which is an adult mystery thriller, and this was for the chance card that I pulled in my March Bookopoly. So Bonfire follows a woman who is from a small town, as a lot of thrillers do. When she graduated high school, she left this small town and became an environmental lawyer. However, she is now heading back there because the big company that is based in the town has been accused of poisoning or contaminating the water supply, and she's going to perform tests and see if she can find any evidence of this. Now the problem is that this town is heavily reliant on this business. They invest in a lot of things like the school and the resources that the town has, as well as employing a lot of people, and they have also caused the town to grow by expanding the economy and the industry in this town. So a lot of people are reluctant to help our main character. However, our main character does also find that while she is in her hometown, a lot of memories from the past are being dredged up, and she does start to feel like the mysterious disappearance of her childhood best friend, who she turned out to hate in high school, may not actually be a runaway, and that something could have happened to her. Now I gave this 3 stars. I did enjoy it. It was very compelling and I was always wanting to read on. However, I felt like the environmental aspect of the story was just a plot device to get the main character back to her hometown to actually solve the real mystery, which is the mystery of what happened to the girl that went missing in or after high school. When I was reading this book, one of the things that I didn't enjoy about it was the legal jargon while they were pursuing this water contamination case. They were talking about court cases and how to persecute this company, and there was a lot of legal jargon flying around that I just didn't understand because I don't know a lot about law. I don't read a lot of crime or thrillers or anything like that. It's not a genre I'm super interested in, so I don't know a lot about it. So I wasn't enjoying that, and then to find out that then that was kind of irrelevant, about a third or halfway through the book, they do some tests on the water and then they're waiting for answers essentially, and it moves on to this other mystery about the girl, and that is what the book is actually about. So I was kind of annoyed that this section that I didn't understand and was going right over my head and making my reading experience enjoyable did turn out to be kind of irrelevant. I would recommend this book if you are a fan of the Roanoke Girls, because the other mystery surrounding the girl is kind of similar to the Roanoke Girls, which is a thriller that I absolutely love. So if you do like the Roanoke Girls, you could maybe check this out. It was an average thriller. I don't tend to rate thrillers too highly anyway, unless they really shock me, but this one was good. Just not super fascinating, but I don't regret reading it. During rereadathon, I reread Lucas by Kevin Brooks. This is a young adult contemporary story about this girl who lives on an island just off the English coast, and a boy mysteriously turns up one day and he's living in the woods. A lot of people really don't like that he's come to town and they want to bully him out of it. They're calling him a gypsy, they're being very mean to him, they throw rocks at him and sort of gash his head open, and essentially this boy has done nothing wrong, so our main character chooses to befriend him. She's very intrigued by him. She lives in a very small town, so sort of new people are very interesting to her, especially people who have lived a very different life than her. This book has all of the trigger warnings. There's trigger warnings for attempted sexual assault, trigger warnings for substance abuse, suicide and attempted suicide, so it is definitely impactful and dark. Now I gave this 4 stars. I did really enjoy it, nearly as much as I did the first time around. Obviously I was more of the age to read it then, but I think it's still really good. One of the problems that I thought I would have with this is that it would now be considered problematic like 13 years after it was published, but I didn't think it was. I think it handled all of the difficult topics that it discussed very tastefully, and I don't think I picked up on anything that was even slightly problematic, which I was very surprised about. This book has a really bittersweet ending that always gets me right in the feels. Is it bittersweet? It's not bittersweet, it's just kind of really sad, but I absolutely love this, and now because I did enjoy this, I'm excited to reread some more Kevin Brooks books that I read when I was like 13, 14 and see if I enjoy them as much as I enjoyed rereading this one. The next book was the one that I DNF'd, so I'm just going to touch upon it briefly, and that was Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. I did have this book out from the library. I was about halfway through when I had to take it back because somebody else had a hold on it, and essentially I wasn't enjoying it, so I decided that I would just like give it back instead of trying to finish it because I wasn't into it anyway. So Empire of Sand follows a girl who is the daughter of this very high-powered nobleman. He's like the governor of that specific region. The girl's mother is not around anymore, but she was part of a clan of typically wanderers who commune with the Deva, which are godlike spirits. And because of her heritage, the main character can do that as well, but the problem is it is pretty much illegal in this world, and so it's kept hidden that she has these powers. Now I really liked the atmosphere at the beginning and I was very intrigued, and I really enjoyed the first section. I did have sick brain when I was reading it, but I was enjoying my time reading it. The problem that I had is that I got to the middle section and the main character is in the desert and she's learning this ritual that helps her to communicate with the Deva at a certain time of year, but it was just so boring. She was just in this miserable desert place with these horrible people learning to dance in the sand, and I wasn't compelled to continue. Normally I would have finished it anyway, but as it was due back at the library and I wasn't in any hurry to pick it up and continue, I did decide to DNF it and I just returned it to my library. I then read The Absolute Beast, that is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I'm pretty sure you guys will have seen this floating around. It is a very hyped 2019 release. It was released just at the end of February. She thick, she real thick. So this is an adult epic fantasy that takes place in this world that is very divided. So you have the South, the West and the East. The East are dragon riders, the South are dragon slayers. There is also an area of the South that are Wyvern worshippers, and then you have the West that follow this religion of knights and virtues. They think that the East are heathens, the East think that the West are contaminated with a sickness called the Red Plague, and the South pretty much keep to themselves. Now while all of these different areas of the world have their issues with each other, the one thing that they do all have in common is that they are very afraid of the Nameless One, who is essentially this really big bad wyvern that arose because of a error in the mystical forces of the world, and this wyvern was created. In the grief of ages, they managed to lock him away, but they soon find out that there is a very distinct possibility that he may arise sometime soon, and they all have their own different ways of dealing with this threat. That is a very summarized plot because there is a lot of different things going on here. It's a classic epic fantasy plot. It's very hard to describe succinctly, so that's pretty much the best I can do. I gave this book 4 stars. It wasn't a 5-star read, guys. It wasn't. So there are a lot of things that I thoroughly enjoyed about this. There are a lot of things that I absolutely adored, particularly the world building, which I found to be lush, well developed, and very expansive. I don't think I can really fault the world at all. The research that Samantha Shannon has put into this book is extremely evident, and it definitely pays off with the richness of the world. The problem is that this is an 830-page standalone epic fantasy, and this world is so large and so much is packed into this novel that the further I got into the novel, the more I realized why epic adult fantasies aren't traditionally standalones. So because of the nature of this book, an epic fantasy in one installment, you have around 200 to 250 pages that is essentially just solid world building. Everybody's getting into their places for the story to start. After that, you have 100 to 200 pages of setting up the actual plot. So when we've established the scene, we find out what the conflict is going to be. And then after that, you only have 400 pages of the actual book. There are essentially no traveling scenes in this book, and while I completely understand why, because there isn't the page space, and I know a lot of people really don't like traveling scenes, but I feel like what we get in these moments of downtime when not a lot is happening but movement is we get to spend time with the characters as they're not doing much else, and we build a lot of relationships with them. Now, because the traveling scenes were all cut out, I didn't feel particularly connected to a lot of the characters. I really liked Arsalak, and I don't think he was in this anywhere near enough. It was one of those cases where he was there for like a section of the book, and then we just forgot about him for a while, and then he randomly appeared as though it was like, hey look, this character still exists. And at the end of the book, I'm not really sure he was mentioned all that much at all, although I may be mistaken on that. I think he was very briefly mentioned. I also really like Loth, and I know a lot of people really don't care about him, but what I particularly like about Loth is that his narrative was the most interesting. He was traveling around the most, and he was going to different places than anybody else was, and his narrative seemed like a lot more of an adventure than anybody else's. Tane I really liked, but that is because she was in the east with the dragon riders, which I'm obviously naturally going to like people who like dragons more. And Eid and Sabran, I liked Eid particularly. Sabran I did not like at the beginning at all until the very end of the book, and we seemed to spend the most time with those, which wasn't my favourite. So while I did enjoy the characters, I did not feel overly connected to them. When I put this book down at the end, I felt like I wouldn't necessarily miss them. I'm not going to be pining after any of them. I'm not going to be wondering what they're doing, and I do believe that is because so much is into this book that a lot has been cut out of it, where we would be building relationships with the characters. Another thing that having no type of traveling scene did is made this very abrupt and very jumpy. I have mentioned how Arsalak just appears and disappears randomly whenever he's needed. There is one character in this called Nicholas. There is a section where he's not doing so good and he's in the east. A couple of chapters later, he is in a mountain in the south for about 5 pages, and then he's like back in the east again. And I just got the feeling that he was teleporting around, and it just was not smooth at all. We were just bouncing all across this continent, and I felt like it made for a very disjointed reading experience. Now, what Samantha Shannon has done here is very ambitious, and I do think that she has done it well, or as well as you can, but I feel like this book could have benefited from being a little bit more simple, and that's sad for me to say because everything that was in this I thoroughly enjoyed, but there just needed to be more of this. There wasn't enough space in this book for this story to unfold in the best way that I feel like it could. I've heard rumours that there will be spin-offs in this world, which I'm very excited to see. However, I'm not sure how they are going to work because I feel like it's still going to be the same sort of format if it is going to be standalone novels where we have a whole ton of world building and the plot is really rushed. Regardless, I gave it 4 stars. It was very enjoyable. I was very invested in it. There were just a few things that didn't quite work for me, and I just feel like this story would have benefited from being a duology with 2 750-page installments instead of everything being crammed into this one book. So the last book that I completed in March was my Bookopoly pick for a classic, and that was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I gave this 5 stars, but that was a slightly generous rating, and I will explain why I rated it generously in just a sec. So Rebecca is an adult classic thriller. I believe that it possibly could be considered as the first ever thriller, and it follows a girl who has no name, who is the employee of this busybody gossiping old lady, and they are in Monte Carlo where they meet the very established and distinguished Maximilian de Winter. The busybody old lady gets sick with the flu, and for 2 weeks her employee has nothing to do but wander around. And who does she do it with? Max de Winter, of course. They fall in love across this 2-week period and get married, and he takes her back to his house in the English countryside, which is called Mandalay. However, Maxim has been married before, and when they arrive, his new bride finds herself plagued by the ghost of his ex-wife, Rebecca. So there were a lot of aspects of this that I really loved, which is why I gave it 5 stars. The way that Mandalay is described in this is so beautiful. Mandalay is just a manor house, but the first chapter of descriptions of Mandalay is just so romantic and gothic and picturesque that I was just in love from that first chapter. I really love Daphne du Maurier's writing style, and I'm definitely interested in reading more from her. However, I literally know nothing about any of her books apart from this one, so please recommend any of her books if you have read them. I did read this mostly in audiobook, so this was my audiobook read for the month, although I did flick between the physical and the audiobook. I usually find that that's a really good way to go with classics, because the narrator will pick up the natural flow of the writing style instead of us trying to muddle through it, looking at it from a modern perspective with slightly archaic language. I found this book to be incredibly atmospheric throughout, and I think that the suspense aspects were done really well, considering that I already know the plot twists and what happens in this book because I've watched the movie many times. It's one of my favourites, and it is definitely my favourite black and white movie and my favourite Hitchcock movie. I also really enjoyed the themes in this book. For example, the main character has no name, and that is very representative of her own expectations of herself. She spends a lot of time in this book trying to live up to the ghost of Rebecca, this woman who she's never met but she feels like is the perfect example of what Maxim wants, even though he just wants her to be herself. So she's definitely always feeling overshadowed by Rebecca and Rebecca's presence and the way that the house has been left and how Rebecca decorated the house, and she has a lot of paranoia, a lot of insecurity. Maxim definitely has his own issues. He's very dark, he's very broody, he's battling with things that he doesn't want to face, and all of this just came together to create this beautifully complex and dark and atmospheric and compelling novel, and I really enjoyed this. Now, if I was rating it honestly on my gut feeling of this book, I would rate it a 4. However, the reasons that I would rate it down a little bit is because of typical characteristics of classic literature. And what I mean by that is that in places this was very wordy, it would go off on a tangent that wasn't really necessary. Like there's this bit where a boat crashes, which leads to something else happening later, but it was just so long-winded, this entire chapter about a boat crashing. And in conversation there will also be a lot of repetition. Now this happens in classics a lot because authors were often paid per word, so I don't feel like I can rate it down for something that is a sign of the times and not a reflection of the quality of the book, which is why I gave this 5 stars. Now, for those of you who have been following on with Bookopoly and wanted to know if I finished Scythe by Neil Shusterman, I have not. It will be included in my April wrap-up because I am on page 371. I have about 80 pages left. I've said this before, but I'm not penalising myself for Bookopoly books that I've started but not finished, because I have managed to get to them. I am in the process of them. It's just I haven't got around to finishing them yet. So this was my last Bookopoly book for March for the viewer recommends prompt, and I'm not going to go into it now because obviously I'll recap in April, but I am thoroughly enjoying this. Like most things this month, there are definitely aspects that I'm not 100% keen on, but overall I love this world and it's a very compelling book. So that is everything for my super long and super long-winded March wrap-up. Please let me know if you have read any of these books or what your favourite book of the month was. Please also don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as the links to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.